When you create a pivot table using tables that have been added to the Excel data model, you can then filter that pivot table using what's called a timeline. Timeline is a new feature that's available for pivot tables in Excel 2013, and I'll demonstrate how to create them and use them by using the timeline sample file, which you can find in the Chapter 9 folder of your exercise files archive. I created this pivot table in Power Pivot so the tables that provide its data are part of Excel's data model. To filter a pivot table using a timeline, you have to have a field that is formatted as a date. And if I scroll up in the pivot table fields pane, you can see that there is a date field. So even though the date field isn't currently displayed in the pivot table, I can use its contents as the basis for my timeline. To add the timeline filter, click any cell in the pivot table, and then on the Insert tab, click Timeline. When I do, the Insert Timelines dialog box appears, and on the Active tab, I can see the name of the table providing the data that I'll use as my sort value. And then, within that table, there is the date field. So I'll go ahead and check that fields box and click OK. Doing so hides the pivot table fields pane and adds a timeline. If a timeline looks a lot like a slicer, that's not a coincidence. They are related tools. Now I can use the timeline's controls to filter my data. So let's say I only want to display data for January of 2013. To do that, I need to scroll back in the timeline, and you can see that I'm currently in the year 2013, January, February, and March going to the right, and then for 2012, you've got December, November, and so on. So let's say I want to see the data for January of 2013. I just click the timeline segment below January, and doing so filters the pivot table. If I want to include another month, then I can drag the handle at the edge of a particular line segment, or whatever the current filter is, and drag it to the left, so that I include December 2012 in with January 2013. If I want to reduce the time displayed, then I can just drag it to the left, such as here for January, and now I only see December 2012. Unfortunately, one thing you can't do is select multiple segments using the Control key. So for example, here I have December selected. If I wanted to also select February of 2013, if I hold down the Control key and click the February segment, all I do is change the filter so it displays February. You can also change the time period by which you filter. So for example, right now, the timeline is based on individual months. If I want, I can click this time element or segment control here, and you can see that I can filter by years, quarters, months, or days. I'll go ahead and click quarters, and you can see that I have Q1 through Q4 of the years 2013 and 2012. So if I click Q4 of 2012, I'll see the data for November and December. There is no data in the source table for October of 2012. And as before, if I want to extend the selection, I can drag the right edge of the timeline indicator, so it covers Q1 of 2013, and I get my sales for January through March of that year. If I want to clear the filter that I've applied using a timeline, I can just click the Clear Filter button, and again, that's exactly like you do when you work with a slicer. And if I want to remove the timeline, I just right-click it and click Remove Timeline. Timelines let you filter your table based on time data. So if you have a field in one of your source tables used in the pivot table that is formatted as a date, you can create a timeline and filter your data visually so you can see exactly which time segments are included and which aren't.